Today guys, what I'm going to be sharing with you is ideas for compressor and EQ. Now, one of the requirements you need is a compressor or a noise gate in your radio show, and I think it's quite tricky. I think it's hard to use a noise gate at times if you're using the SQA stems, because largely they're pretty well recorded. There's not a lot of spillage at all for you to cut out. Maybe if you're using your own recordings, that's a little bit easier. But we're going to try this idea with a compressor and some follow-up EQ. So really what we're trying to achieve is kind of a telephone style vocal here with some really heavy compression. So this is what I've used. You could use it on a telephone call, but I've used it on this kind of radio sweeper. So it sounds like this, and then I'll let you see how to achieve that sound.
You're listening to Scotland FM.
Okay, so we're really focusing on the You're Listening to Scotland FM, so I'll set up a little loop on that. So you can see my chain here. I've got a gain plugin at the start, which if you've seen the early videos you'll know why that's there. I've got a compressor and then an EQ. So let's have a look at these compression settings. So here is our compressor. We've got our threshold, which tells us at what level that's going to kick in. Our ratio, how much squeeze we want on that sound. Our attack, so how long do we leave that transient before it kicks in. And then some makeup gain as well. You can see that's pretty generous makeup gain there. So the process of applying this. So the first thing I did was I had a look at some of my presets in here. So in this case I've used a compressor tool. I went to VCA smashed. Now these kind of FET, Opto, these VCAs, these are all modelled on real life compressors. So they all do sound slightly different. In this case I want a lot of heavy compression, so hence the VCA smashed. So after that I then went in and applied a very generous threshold and a reasonably generous ratio as well, 11:1. I've kept the attack fairly short because I want this to kick in nice and early. I quite want a really flat vocal on this. And then I've applied a generous amount of makeup gain as well. One of the things I don't want this compressor to do is just boost the overall volume. I don't want that. I want it to apply the compression and really keep it at a very similar level. So what I did was I kind of set this up to apply quite a generous amount, and then I kind of toggled this on and off. So I played it without the compressor on.
You're listening to Scotland FM.
And then I played it with the compressor on.
You're listening to Scotland FM.
And what I'm looking for is to try and get a very similar level.
You're listening to Scotland FM. You're listening to Scotland FM.
And that's kind of similar. I actually think it might be a wee bit quiet, but that's okay. So yeah, I've got a lovely squashed sound, and now let's have a look at applying that telephone side of things. So this is where the EQ comes into it. Now the idea with our telephone vocal is to be really heavy, so we're going to put a high pass on down here, and we're going to put a low pass up on the high stages. Now you can see I've made a further cut in here as well. I've really cut quite heavily, around 4K, and I'll show you why that is. So this is it without that cut. I want you to have a look. I've got the analyzer on, which is helpful, and you can see around that 4K area.
You're listening to Scotland FM.
And you can hear quite a bit of sibilance around that 4K area. Have a look. I'm going to keep this on a loop, and you can see the peak and hopefully hear a bit of it as well.
You're listening to Scotland FM. You're listening to Scotland FM.
So because I've been so heavy on that compressor, I'm starting to bring out some of these maybe unwanted sounds like the sibilance. But that's okay. That's we can use a little bit of corrective EQ. So if I didn't have the analyzer on, I could maybe have used a kind of boost and sweep technique to try and find where this aggressive, harsh frequency is.
You're listening to Scotland FM.
You can really hear it shooting up there. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to keep that bandwidth, that Q, nice and narrow, and make a really sharp cut in there.
You're listening to Scotland FM.
And it's got rid of a little bit of that sibilance. It's maybe taken a couple other frequencies with it. Maybe I could have made this slightly narrower, but I like how that's sounding just now. So, I'd really recommend trying something like this out on if you've got a sort of telephone call section, or you just want to make your sweeper sound a little more interesting. And that's a good way of getting some compression into your coursework.